Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing film discussions, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of Hollywood, California.
Oh, not the Alamo Drafthouse, Hollywood, California.
I'm riffing. I thought it would change it up again. So,
I like
Maggie, it happened again. It happened once again in this year of 2024. I think we have another best movie of the year.
It just keeps on happening, which is weird.
We keep raising the bar.
The first 6 months of this year was shit. I feel like everything we saw was a letdown. We were had all these high hopes for all these big things coming out, and they were just mid or disappointing or bad. And we were like, okay, I guess we'll talk about this other thing that we watched 30 years ago, and it's been fine, whatever. But the last, 2 months?
It's been a gauntlet.
It's been crazy. This movie we knew hardly anything about except that it was doing crazy good at film festivals, especially at Cannes, right? And so we were like, okay, this looks weird and fun. We like these people involved, and so we just dove right in.
And what film is this that we're talking about?
Sorry. This is The Substance, which is written and directed? Yeah, written and directed by Coralie Farja. Farja. Oh my gosh.
Good job.
I coached Cam on pronouncing this name for 30 minutes before this, and now I'm second guessing everything.
You'll notice, as a tactical coward, I threw it to you in the moment.
I could see it. It's why I panicked, and I was like, no, I didn't trade for this. I wasn't ready. Anyway, it's fine. It's not as bad as I don't even want to know how some of these guys pronounce her name. But
I think the movie is more than fine, actually.
Well,
and
yes.
I think we should warn you a little bit. We're going to do a quick spoiler-free section, then we're going to jump into the meat and the bones of all of this movie. But top of the line, we have to just recommend this.
Oh my God.
This is one of those bad signal things where we push the schedule and we have to immediately record an episode. The movie's fantastic.
This is so fun.
This is a symphony of body horror and thriller, sci-fi, comedy, satire. It has... we're not going into specifics, right? But this has probably 3 of the best performances of the year from Demi Moore, Margaret Qualley, and Dennis Quaid.
Yeah.
I can't go into it more than that, but the writing and directing from who?
Oh my God, Coralie Farja. Oh my God.
Is just ruthless.
It
and
is
bold. And obviously I'm staring at screen when I'm watching a movie, but the connection felt more magnetic than it usually does.
She is really going for it. Every single second of this movie, you can tell she's put everything into it. There's no pulled punches, nothing is half-assed, no corners are cut.
She's locked in.
It is this movie goes hard for the full run time.
You want me to blow your mind? And that's a perfect transition. Do you know how long this movie was? Because I didn't look it up before.
I have no idea. I mean, it felt kind of long. It felt like a bit of an epic almost, but it also didn't at the same time because it's so fast paced. I have no idea.
It felt, to me, if you told me this was 90 minutes, I would have believed you because I was so locked in. Mm-hmm. The movie is 2 hours and 21 minutes.
Wow. Okay, it didn't feel that long.
I would not have believed that at all.
I was going to guess right around the 2 hour mark. That's
if
crazy.
You're going to see this, and you should, it is one of the best horror movies and most creative, ballsy movies, full stop, this year.
So creative.
You got to see it in a theater because this is such a god-tier theater experience. It reminded me of Terrifier 2.
Yeah. Well, because everybody in the audience is viscerally reacting to what's on screen because it's so weird and gross and strange. It was a really fun collective experience. It goes so much further
than you can imagine.
Yes.
Constantly. I'm genuinely shocked by this runtime. I had to circle it in my notes because I couldn't believe 2 hours and 21 minutes.
It's a long time.
And I think it's that this felt like there was no fat, no pretense. Obviously, there's commentary and subtext in there.
Sure.
But I feel like if this came from an American, you'd feel all of that.
Yeah.
And this would feel 12 hours longer.
It feels so tightly edited. It feels like they took a much longer movie and cut it down, but not in a bad way, in a way that's just these are the essentials. Everything in this movie, every moment is absolutely necessary.
This is a story told at Mach speed with just this gleeful, disgusting intensity. And I was admiring that while I was watching it. Even though I was caught up in the story, I was noticing how these actors who are so dialed in, you can tell everyone was calibrated to be on the same wavelength. Sometimes you would have a great actor or a really interesting character in one scene and then never see them again. And it was interesting and memorable. And in a lesser movie, I think you would have brought all those people back just for the sake of having them back.
Right. And there was no like wasted time on transitions and like transitional scenes. There wasn't any of that. You just cut like to the next scene, and you immediately from the context can tell how much time has passed, or if that even matters, how much time has really passed, and like what's going on next. Like you everything is in media res and it doesn't matter.
It's got to be one of the least precious movies we've seen this year in that way, where it is. That's what I mean by ruthless or merciless or all these kind of. I'm trying to get at this idea, and as usual, I just strafe around the problem with the similar words.
Sure.
But it's that you'll either have a great actor or character in one scene and never see him again, or depending on the needs of the story, you'll just hand over the movie to one of these actors for like 10 or 20 minutes at a time.
Right. Or it's like it's been 40 minutes since you've seen that actor, but they're back and it's fine. Yeah.
Right. And it didn't obey these like general rules or conventions.
It didn't obey like any rules.
Right.
Except I guess for like one rule in horror, which is where things get worse and worse as it goes. But like that's about it.
But there was this supreme confidence in execution that I found just infectious. I thought there was more and more momentum as the film kept going. And it's gross in the best possible way. I'm glad you used that word earlier. Every needle injection, every creature reveal. Like, I was just writing down words to describe this experience because I was so giddy when we left the theater last night. Savage, unflinching, efficient, shocking, merciless. And this is where I want to wrap up the non-spoiler section because...
To add another adjective, sorry.
Yes,
grotesque.
Grotesque is,
I think,
a perfect one.
Like, to describe all of it, not just the gore, but everything about it.
Totally.
Go ahead, sorry.
That's the gleefulness. It's enjoying grossing you out.
Yes.
It knows when it lingers on a shot exactly what it's doing.
Yes.
Go into this movie knowing nothing, knowing as little as possible, knowing not a single word past what we're going to say here. It is that good, and it will take you on a wild ride like nothing else I've seen this year.
I also don't recommend you eat while watching it. I felt for the people who were eating at Alamo.
Yeah, full meal.
We had a beer and that was it, and I could barely drink that. This movie was so gross.
So that's it for non-spoiler section. We're moving into the full spoiler discussion now. So let's talk about the smoothie of influences and the canon that you and I have in these discussions that I think is all swirled up in this movie, the kind of comps we were talking about. I told you this when we got in the car, but the line I came up with when I was trying to make sense of the movie was the thirst trap of Dorian Gray.
Yes. I did really like that.
What do we think about the Dorian Gray connection?
The Dorian Gray is very much there. I mean, it wasn't actually the first influence that I thought of. The first comparable that I'd like to talk about first actually was Cinderella. Because we're in the spoiler section, right? So she's got to take this thing but she only gets to be in the young hot body for 7 days before she has to switch over. And even still, before she switches over, she has to not re-energize every day. What's it called? Stabilize every day and inject the spinal fluid into her leg. Otherwise she starts short-circuiting and bleeds out and dies.
It's so gross.
It's so fucking gross. And so, it's this weird twisted Cinderella where she gets to be the beautiful princess until the clock strikes midnight, and then she has to go home and go back to being poor, or in this case,
she turns
old.
Into a pumpkin.
Yeah, exactly right. And so I liked that comparison because it was like the fairy tale thing, because what's interesting is that it's this woman who's older, but she's falling prey to what to many could seem as this sort of like childish dream of wanting to be young and pretty and beautiful and desirable. Obviously it's much deeper than that. It's about being seen and valued and capable and successful, because
seen as a woman,
right? Well, and she got her success when she was that young and beautiful, largely because she was that young and beautiful, right? But still, on the outside, it feels like this childish thing. And so pairing it with this fairy tale thing is really nice and fun and interesting. And then at the end, when she's in that blue dress, it's the most Cinderella costume I've ever seen.
That's a great pull.
And so I liked that connection a lot.
It's a fairy tale in the original German sense of the term.
Well, exactly. So then when you start to see her sort of taking from the older self to give to the younger self, that's when I started thinking about Dorian Gray. And so you have this, like, especially when she builds the like dark room hidden behind the bathroom where she puts the old body when she gets to be young. And so I liked this idea of her getting to grow ugly in the dark while the young beautiful one lives out. That's a really nice comparison.
For me, I think, and the Cinderella, that's an interesting kind of Kids Bop version of the Dorian Gray connection we're talking about, because it's a story that is about identity, that uses this metaphor, sort of explosion of metaphor, of body horror. Mm-hmm. That's how it executes and delivers upon the idea and literalizes the more philosophical kind of abstractions
it makes it
playing
very
with.
literal.
It makes it visual as well for a movie.
It's not just that she's like being ugly in her life. It's like you see her literally taking from the other body and the other body literally suffering from it.
But it's about this duality, right? Mm-hmm. It's the guy and then the portrait of the guy. Cinderella, it's her, and then it's her as the princess.
Yeah, right.
I was reminded of 2 other movies that we have done episodes on that deal with that same sort of identity horror, playing with body horror and gross out stuff. Black Swan.
Oh.
There's the 2 Natalie Portmans.
Mm-hmm, so the Black Swan and the White Swan. Okay,
yeah,
fine.
It's the same sort of duality, and then it goes off the rails at the end in a very similar way. Mm. And the other one is Tusk.
I did think about Tusk at the very end.
What a delightful film.
When we get the crazy third body, I thought a lot about Tusk.
Totally. But also, there were moments we didn't see Tusk in a theater, and I really wish I had, because there's so much of that movie that is absurdist and clearly going for comedy. Obviously, Kevin Smith has that as his background.
Yeah.
But watching this movie, there were, in the theater with a packed, really locked-in audience, there were a lot of people laughing. And
especially
guffawing,
by the end, because it gets so ridiculous.
But I was not amongst that. I laughed at certain moments, like the guy across the hall when he was being silly and he was all caught up in himself trying to flirt with Sue.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
But I didn't laugh at any of the third act.
I did a little bit, but largely because I wasn't comfortable and not because I found it funny. It was more like, this is so absurd and upsetting, and I have to laugh at it.
You could tell by the tone of the laughter that wasn't how a lot of people were laughing. Because, and this isn't one of my comparisons here, but I almost viewed the third act more like when I'm watching The Thing, where I'm enraptured and grossed out and interested and fascinated by what I'm seeing, but there's not really that level of an emotional component besides ew.
Yeah, sure.
And staring at it.
Yeah.
I didn't catch the humor there. I mean, I get the satire and what they're doing, and her having the Demi Moore cutout that she has on her face at the end. Uh-huh. But I thought it was interesting how it wove in enough humor that some people could enjoy it on that level. I'm wondering how much people would have laughed at Justin Long. For example, in the last scene where they go and visit him at the zoo, and you see he's got like the Pepsi can and all that there, I found that heartbreaking and brutal. I thought that ending was absolutely bleak and heartless.
It's very sad.
It's very powerful, but I found it incredibly affecting emotionally.
Right.
And that's how I felt here, even though there was like a brain crawling its way to a Hollywood.
Yes, it was like a lot of people, especially when she's up on the stage, or I don't even know, when it's up on the stage.
The third evolution.
Yeah, and everybody is laughing. And it is funny and absurd, but you're also like so sad, and you're like, well, why am I laughing?
Yeah.
Isn't that the whole point of the movie, is that we find, age disgusting, and so we're all laughing at this thing that's like the most extreme disgusting version of what happens when a body becomes old and fucked up.
And it's someone we've spent 2.5 hours with in absolute agony.
Right.
So the laughing, I got it, but it also, that's not how I was feeling at all. I was slightly thrown by it, but I also thought it kind of added to the experience.
No, I was happy that, because it was really just highlighting how absurd the whole thing became, but that's sort of the point, is that it is so absurd, and the way we treat people who are elderly is also so absurd.
Yeah, I mean, all the shots of Sue's show were equally absurd and over the top.
Right, and like a lot of the scenes when... Not the third form, but when Demi Moore has been so drained, has become so old. A lot of those scenes, I just got really sad.
Oh yeah.
And I was like thinking about my grandparents, and it was like, I didn't feel good at all. I felt really upset watching them when they try to kill each other. Like, it was really deeply upsetting.
I remember when Barbarian came out, people were trying to classify that in the subgenre of hagsploitation.
Oh, okay.
And I saw that term applied to this, and I think it's sort of as crass as it is not endearing. But
what is that supposed to mean? Just like they're ridiculing or critiquing the idea of making fun of old ladies? Is that what it's saying?
No, that it's a send up of that sort of idea and why we react to the hag idea that way.
Oh, okay.
And what we're afraid of, and what it provokes in us, and exploring that reaction. But that's not really what I got from this.
Mm-hmm.
I was more locked into, like we were talking about before, the Dorian Gray, the Black Swan, the Tusk. And those are all identity stories expressed through body horror.
Right.
And so much of the movie is just about these two characters. It's Elizabeth and Sue, which is Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. And if I'm going to talk about two-handers with shifting power dynamics that are about body horror, then, because they are the exact same story, I get to, in the same breath, talk about Frankenstein and Dr. Faustus.
Okay, well, I figured that was inevitable.
Because those are both, that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
They're both identity plays. They're both body horror stories. They both have this built-in creation myth and showing the characters living the consequences of their actions caught in this living hell. Do all of those themes sound familiar?
Absolutely. No,
that's the whole plot of the film.
That's totally fair. Yeah, the Frankenstein comparison, I think, is the closer one. But I see both of those in there. That's very fun.
Well, you're wrong, but
okay,
I appreciate the politeness.
I think because the Frankenstein monster, even though Frankenstein and his monster are, in fact, two like different people, the monster is still an extension of the Doctor, and so that's an interesting idea about like split identity and having one inside the other. The Faustus thing is a little different.
Well, let's walk through it a little bit, because
okay.
I think I get what you're saying. It almost felt like viewing these stories in a split screen, where you can watch multiple POVs at the same time, because you're making these two characters, whether it's Frankenstein and the monster, Faustus and the demon, the original Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley, you're viewing both of their POVs in a way that you don't in those original texts.
Yeah.
Usually you get one of their POVs, or you get to extrapolate or think about them, but they're not equal in the narrative.
Right.
And here you see those characters equal in the narrative. You see that split identity, and you get to become both of those characters. But the tenets of this narrative framework that we talk about all the time, they go back to Faustus. That's why I'm arguing Frankenstein is a Faustus thing.
Oh, right, yeah.
And the basic rules of this Faustus framework of a character signing a contract, which she does here, and then she gets the delivery, and she keeps talking to the voice on the phone asking if she wants to quit.
Sure.
And she knows the punishment of this when she stops the process, what's going to happen to her body. And you could look at, there's a scene in Faustus, the Parade of the Seven Deadly Sins. That's basically the life she wants. And she sees that being teased in front of her like the carrot on the stick. So instead of that being something Faustus kind of recoils from, that's what she's leaning into. That's what she's chasing. And I was reminded by, with the voice on the phone that's explaining the rules of this whole thing to her, basically reading her the clauses and bylaws of the contract she's signed to get the substance, that felt like Lucifer.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. He's like voiceless, scary man who you never see. Yeah,
and it's
he kind of is all powerful. Yeah,
and it's even more restrained because that voice is a presence throughout the film. Versus in Dr. Faustus, he's in one scene and then nothing else. But obviously the devil is implied in a Faustus story.
Right.
And I think Dennis Quaid is also sort of playing that idea.
I was going to say, you've got to loop him in there somehow.
You got two Lucifers, basically.
Right. Well, and he is like the ultimate tempter, right? Like, because he is the one who sort of initiates this this action that Elizabeth takes. I mean, it's not only his fault. Like, she's been feeling, stepped on and looked over and cast aside for a long time, just as any woman in Hollywood will as they age. But he sort of, I don't know, initiates it. And I think he kind of clues into what if only she were a certain way, she could have it all,
Well, that's sort of the interesting thing, because taking the original character, Demi Moore's Elizabeth, before you get to Sue, or whatever the hell we're calling the third generation, the thing in the blue dress at the end, that is your Faustus character, who then signs the contract and gets this supernatural ability of splitting yourself and the eyeballs, doing the egg thing. So then she basically becomes her own Mephistopheles. And the power plays and the power reversals and inversions that make up the drama of the rest of the movie are this one character being split into being both the Faustus and the Mephistopheles.
Right.
To the point that whoever has control of the body, whoever's not in their off week, they become the Mephistopheles. And the other one becomes the one with no power who signed away all their rights.
I see, yeah.
So you're constantly flipping between the Faustus and the Mephistopheles. And that level of dynamism within that central two-hander relationship, you don't get that in Frankenstein.
Right.
There's always the creator and the creation.
Yeah, there's like a clear delineation of who is who. And in this one, it's much messier.
Yes, and that elasticity is why I'm saying there's much more Faustus here than there is Frankenstein. And you're literalizing a lot of that relationship, which is so implied in the play and playful there. You're literalizing that with this feeding requirement where you have to chain them up, and there's this like symbiosis almost on a scientific level that we're teasing out here. The downtime week is so beautiful. That feels like such an amazing, modern, explicit rendition of this story, where you see the demon like collecting on the bargain, where you see when one of the bodies falls on the ground and like breaks their skull and gets dragged into the closet to just lay there for a week. That feels like Faustus being dragged down to hell.
Sure. But it's interesting because there's sort of like a power switch there, because even though the person, whoever's in the other body, has the power in that situation, they don't really, because they only have 7 days.
Yes.
And if they don't switch, like if they don't, not reactivate, what is it? Recalibrate?
Yeah, sure.
What is it called?
Yeah.
Whatever, where she re-energizes it.
Stabilize,
thank you.
Second time.
I can't think of that one. I'm not stable.
Maggie didn't stabilize
I didn't
today.
stabilize today. I'm short-circuited. If you don't stabilize, you like will die. And so the other body does have some kind of power over you. Like the first time that the boundary is crossed, when the younger body takes too much, when Sue takes too much, before she leaves for the night, she says, "Don't eat too fast," to the other body. And she's being funny, and it's funny to us, but you can also like, there's a bit of pleading there. Like she's recognizing that Elizabeth's body has power over the situation, because once she's done feeding, it's time to switch. And there's nothing Sue can do about it other than make this devil's bargain and take more and then open that terrible can of worms.
And there's an interesting blurring of time here, because in Faustus, you see him make the deal and you see him get what he bargained for. And then at the very end, he's punished and dragged down to hell off screen. And you assume he suffers for all eternity. The reason I like the substance as an addition to this Faustus mythology, the reason I want to put it up there on that shelf, is because it really explores the aftermath, the him getting punished in hell part, as much as it does him getting the thing he bargained for. It would be true. Like, I mean, there's this balance of crime and punishment. If you make it maybe a more simple example, say a character robs a bank and then gets arrested and thrown in prison. The equivalent of the way you break up the screen time and the substance is that half of the movie is about the characters spending all the money they get from robbing the bank, and the other half is seeing them in prison.
Right, and they've got to go back and forth and back and forth.
And I've never seen a version of Frankenstein or Faustus or any of in this long lineage of this kind of Faustian bargain type narrative framework that explores the aftermath and punishment as much as the substance does.
Right, because it's all happening at the same time. I mean, there's still like a general like linear, like there's still an arc of things getting worse and worse. It's not the same the whole way through, but yeah, still, I mean, even after the first switch, like after it goes back to Elizabeth's body, you can tell that she's like starving and feels like shit because she just aged 30 years and she's like already like just feels awful and old and stuff. And so then every time it's worse and worse and worse. And so and you can see her just like struggling to find meaning after that first switch, because her first 7 days with the young body were so amazing. And so the punishment is just not having it, even before you get to all of the actual weird, fucked up supernatural stuff that starts happening to her.
For someone who has more or less devoted his life to this one story, I thought the substance had a remarkably fresh, new, interesting angle on this Faustus framework.
I do really like that.
There's one other thing I want to play with, moving beyond Frankenstein, Faustus, all these other movies. I want to talk about Kubrick for a second, because I had all these little pinprick moments during this screening where I was reminded of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, a lot of the sets feel like that. I totally see that. As you were saying, I was like, oh yeah, 2001.
But I don't try to do that when the movie's on. I just pay attention to the movie.
I didn't notice that either, but now that you said it, I can't unsee it.
But it was the settings that made me think of Kubrick. Obviously, there's a little bit of Shining in there, where you see that long hallway to the TV studio.
Hallway, there's a lot of these like big symmetrical shots of like open architectural settings. Yeah.
But that hallway is also blood red, which reminds you of the elevator doors and the tidal wave of blood. And that scene where Elizabeth she goes into the men's room because the woman's restroom is out of order, and she's in the stall, and she ends up eavesdropping on Dennis Quaid, and that's where she finds out the inciting incident.
Like Grady.
That looks like the Grady bathroom in The Shining. So there's already bits of Kubrick in here, and you could argue that the whole thing with the substance of going to the P.O. box and holding up the card.
I mean, even the long hallway in her apartment is kind of like the hallways in the Overlook. Like,
totally.
There's stuff there. Sorry,
but the secret society, the rules and rituals of everything with the substance, that's Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah.
The really, really strong, overwhelming color work is also very Eyes Wide Shut, where he oversaturates and blows out the lights, all the Christmas lights in the various bar scenes. So we've got some Shining, we've got some Eyes Wide Shut, but the thing that caught me, and this was during the film, against my will, was 2001: A Space Odyssey, where it felt like we were almost rolling that movie in reverse. Where you start at the end. For me, the most memorable image within 2001, a movie full of unbelievable, unforgettable images, is that weird-ass hotel room thing at the end. That room where it's floor lit.
Yes.
Like there are lights
it's
in
like
the
this
floor.
Weird futuristic room, but it's also like this like Baroque style as well. It's a very weird room.
This weird, surreal floor lit hotel room. And that was the weirdness that we got into at the end of the movie. But even the first shot, I mean, you're starting at a weirdo place here.
Yeah.
And then when she takes the first injection, that's where, if you remember, before we get to the freaky hotel room at the end of 2001, you go through this like colorful space-time screensaver looking thing towards the edge of the universe. You remember that? Where it like speeds up faster and faster. And
I don't remember
color
that,
swirling around. It's kaleidoscopic and funky. We get some of that here when she takes the first injection. So we're still rolling it in reverse. And then by the time you get to the end of the movie, which would here be the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey, when you have the third generation Elizabeth at the New Year's Eve show,
you get
the big monster version. This is where I was so taken, because I was reminded of the pivotal transition moment at the beginning of 2001, where you see the monkeys are beating each other to death and they throw the bone up into the air and it turns into the spaceship.
Well, and you get that it's the same musical cue. It's that same bit of music.
Exactly. Exactly. And that kind of crystallized the idea for me, like, okay, I got to dig into this a little more.
Sure. Well, even if you're thinking about the bone that turns into the spaceship, again, this movie kind of fucks it up and makes it weird when she finds like the chicken bone in her leg. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So like, I totally see what you're saying. I'm with you.
Because like, I love that moment because it's an unforgettable visual. But what it represents, I guess, is this changeover moment where there's a leap in technology from the bone, which represents, of course, early man using tools, to, we use enough tools, we get to build spaceships, right? So that's a huge advancement in technology. But it's also kind of similar. Like, as much as it is this seismic leap forward, there's some underlying continuity. There's a bit of a like Ship of Theseus human ingenuity underneath it. It's the same humans that picked up the bone as the ones who built the spaceship.
Sure, okay.
There's a continuity there in our technological innovation. I think a lot of that continuity within this massive changeover moment, I think that exists within the substance too. Because that final monster, that third evolution of Elizabeth, is all three characters.
Right.
She literally introduces herself by multiple names. She's wearing a mask. She calls herself Elizabeth and Sue. She has that face sticking out of her shoulder. And of course, she is this new thing. When I was talking about before, it felt like we were watching a split screen where we were seeing these two POVs. That scene at the end feels like it's the moment where that metaphor becomes unsustainable. It's almost a literal double exposure, blowing up that duality and continuity.
Yeah, you can't understand anything. It's all become messy and blurred and on top of each other.
It's like if you paused the movie at the moment where the bone turns into the spaceship and you had to reckon with seeing both of them.
Yeah, which one is which and how do they...
So there's some Eyes Wide Shut, there's some Shining, and I think there's a lot of 2001. And if you're making that many Kubrick comparisons that are in a favorable light, then you're in really good fucking company.
But at no point did it feel like she was trying to do a Kubrick movie.
No.
Like, it still had its very own distinct style and flavor. And like Kubrick's movies are famously slow paced. This movie was not slow paced by any means. There were still a lot of long periods of silence without dialogue, which is I think a very characteristically Kubrick kind of thing. But still the movie is very, like we said earlier, it is fast paced. It is quick. There's no fat. It is like boom, 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 boom. It's just that there's little sprinkles of Kubrick throughout. And I really like those comparisons.
Yeah,
I think it was really fun.
I was locked in from the first shot of this movie. I'm still like buzzing from that experience. It was really, so good.
Really fun. And I just loved the way it was playing with like figuring out who you are and hating parts of yourself and wanting to remove or kill or squash parts of yourself, but then it ends up making the whole self worse. Like it was very messy and identity driven,
relatable.
Yeah, it was. And like while also giving you like the easiest way to look at this is just like a commentary on how we treat women and how we treat people who age, but even within that there's all this other fun philosophical self stuff in there too. And it was really fun. I really enjoyed this movie.
The substance, absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us and for listening. We've done a ton of movie coverage lately. We've talked about, oh my God, so many fantastic movies. Strange Darling, Sing Sing, Alien Romulus. We've been popping off with great, great movies. And judging by the movies we have booked for the next couple months, it's only going to get more exciting from here. We just dropped another movie roundup episode over on the Patreon, $2 a month. You can support the show and get a whole massive growing back catalog. We've recorded more than a dozen of these roundup breakfast buffet episodes.
Yeah.
But I think it was volume 11 just came out.
Volume 11, yes.
But we've recorded a couple other ones already. And that one we're talking about My Old Ass. Which is amazing, heartbreaking coming of age story.
So good.
We're talking about the 1911 Dante's Inferno movie, one of the first feature films, silent film, evoking all this Gustave Doré, incredible, beautiful. And the third one was
Strangers Chapter 1.
Thank you. Great pull. Yes, so we've got tons of movie coverage on the channel and even more over on Patreon. Thank you very much for supporting the show. Please go check out The Substance, and we will see you back here in a few days with another brand new episode.